What's up, guys? Joe Holka here. Today is Tuesday, October 30th. Be sure and check out the full version of NHL Inside the Lab over at Fantasy Labs. After the preview, stick around for some additional free analysis on today's slate. And also, as a bonus, going to give you guys one of my favorite player prop bets of the night. Per usual, the full player prop bets article can be found at the Action Network. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Toss me a like on this video. And let me know in the comments when you think of today's 11-game slate. Let's jump in. Before we get into it, Sean, any news and notes or anything?
A couple little bits of news and notes for Boston. It appears that Torrey Krug is going to be back into the lineup, but Grzelcyk's going to be out. So look for Krug to jump back in and probably get top power play time for Boston. And then it looks like Alex Radulov is going to be back for Dallas. It looks like they're going to scratch Tyler Pitlick. So Tyler Pitlick was someone we've been streamlining a little bit over the last week or so. So he's going to be out of the lineup, and then Radulov's jumping back in. And they actually changed their lines around a little bit. Outside of that, there's maybe a few little things that will be happening throughout the day, but you'll just have to check the lines pages to see if there's any updates on that. But those are the two big news and notes that I saw for this morning.
Yeah, big slate. Be sure and keep an eye on our team lines page, our starting goaltenders page as well. So let's go ahead and jump right in to the team ratings page. And kind of a few things stood out to me by looking at this earlier. It does seem like a really good spot for San Jose against the Rangers. They are at home. And I'm sure we'll talk about my Phoenix Coyotes, but they've turned things around a little bit, Sean, in the goal-scoring area. After a really rough start, a lot of times this kind of happens. Like, these teams really are doing a lot of the right things. Like, they're out-shooting teams by 10 shots almost every night. The puck's going to start going in, like we talked about. So I think over the past 5-6 games or so, they've been one of the highest-scoring teams in the league. So that's nice to see from the Coyotes, but they do have a really nice Corsi expectation and a fantastic matchup against Ottawa at home again. And then Pittsburgh against the Islanders. These three spots look really strong to me on paper. What are your thoughts about these three matchups at the top?
Yeah, it's something we've been talking about. Arizona's finally starting to score. You see their goals for over the last months all the way up to 2.6. So that's risen from the 0.8 that we saw that earlier in the year. So we said that it was eventually going to start happening where they started scoring goals. And in fact, that did start happening where they started scoring goals. So it's good to see them actually start getting on the score sheet. I like Pittsburgh a lot tonight. You see that they're averaging 4.44 goals per game, and they play a really weak New York Islanders team. So I think that makes sense. And then another team to sort of take a look at that isn't at the exact top, but is Philly. They're playing a really weak team. And I think that Philly, you have some of those guys that are a little bit depressed in their price point. So I think they can make a decent amount of sense as well.
Yeah, so just looking at the past 5 games for the Coyotes, 7 goals, 4 goals, 4 goals, 3 goals, and 4 goals. So, I mean, these are against some teams. The Winnipeg Jets, Tampa Bay Lightning, they've been playing good hockey. So it's nice to see that happen. I agree with you on the Philly spot as well. We'll definitely have to take a closer look at that. Anaheim, another team that's been just giving up a ton of shots. Like Gibson in general, like early in the season, like he's making a run for the Vezina at this point. He's keeping this Ducks team in the games. Just they're being outshot every single night, which sets up really well for fantasy. So at that spot, I definitely like some of those situations we talked about. Just sorting by goals for, we do have Columbus at home against Detroit, another team that's given up a lot of goals, not quite as many shots, but looks like a decent spot for them as well. In the matchup rating, a lot of these same teams we've talked about. So any love for Calgary against your Buffalo Sabres tonight, Sean? They're probably the only other team we haven't talked about in this range.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some few plays from Calgary. A guy like Mark Giordano will probably be in play. But overall, with 11 games, you're going to have to pick and choose your spots. And I just think there are better spots out there. However, Buffalo does give up quite a few shots, but they look like they have been better. As you see, they've only been giving up 41 Corsi against over the last month. So Buffalo seems to be less bad in that aspect than they used to be. So it definitely is a team that I sort of like with Calgary, but I think there's better options.
All right, let's move over to the Vegas page, see if we uncovered anything on this larger slate. So Pittsburgh at the top at home against the New York Islanders, followed by the San Jose Sharks, Columbus, Coyotes kind of outside that top tier, which isn't too surprising, but also Carolina. Kind of a tough matchup against Boston, a team that hasn't been giving up a ton of shots, but it might not matter just based on how the system is for Carolina, just unloading shots at will. So any surprises here?
Not really. I mean, you see Pittsburgh's biggest favorite on the slate, something I would have expected. The line sort of moved against them a little bit, and the line sort of moved against San Jose just a smidge. So I like both of those teams. I think Columbus makes a lot of sense. Detroit's really weak overall as well. And then Arizona, we see Arizona is one of the biggest favorites on the slate. So it's good to see they're finally starting to get up there, and their goal scoring has been increased, and which is causing them to be one of the bigger favorites on slate. So it's nice to see that. But yeah, we actually see Buffalo Sabres up here a little bit, Joe, when you look at the implied totals. So you got to like seeing the Sabres up in the top 6 on a slate for their implied total when there's 22 teams on the slate.
Man, this show is turning into a Coyotes and Sabres show, and it's an absolute joke. We should probably reel that in a little bit. Do really like the spot for Columbus. Detroit has allowed the second most goals in the entire league this year. Some other teams on the slate that stand out: the New York Rangers, bottom 5. So really good spot for Columbus and San Jose in that regard. As far as like special teams, it definitely is a really good spot for a couple of these teams, and the ones that kind of stood out for me, at least, of teams that take a lot of penalties is definitely the Colorados at the top. But yeah, looking at Detroit is the one that stands out to me. So really good spot for Columbus on the power play side of things as well. So yeah, anything else kind of stand out to you, Sean? There hasn't been a ton of movement. You mentioned kind of the main ones, but that's pretty much all I got.
Yeah, just a little bit. Just one thing to note with Pittsburgh is Letang is supposedly a game-time decision. All indications are that he's going to play, but I guess I'll mention that just in case, because that's obviously one of the very elite spots of the night. So definitely make sure to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens with your Sabres. Actually, kind of looking at that a little bit deeper, both of these teams, Calgary and Buffalo, top 4 in power play opportunities this year. So if that game ends up seeing a lot of special teams, it could be one of the more under-the-radar games to kind of look at. So anything else before we jump into models?
I think that's a good start to head over to the page and see what we can find from actual plays for tonight.
All right, guys, be sure and check out that full video over at Fantasy Labs. Wanted to give you guys a little bit of additional content today. And we'll start with Pittsburgh, since they're going to be one of the most popular teams on today's slate. The guy I want to talk about is Sidney Crosby, 7,300. We've seen his price creep up, and for good reason. Guy has 5 goals over his last 3 games. We kind of knew this was coming from him, right? We were talking about him as a potential regression candidate in this range when he just hadn't been scoring, and his price was down to 6,700 pretty recently. It was one of the cheapest we've gotten Crosby in quite some time. So he's a guy that's in the 97th percentile in Corsi over the past month. Corsi, again, guys, I'll always say this, but for center, it's extremely important relative to even some of the other positions. So always paying attention to that. Really like Crosby even at this price point. I think it's a fantastic matchup against this New York Islanders team. So he's kind of who I'm dialed into at the center position, kind of at the high end. There's a couple other guys that definitely make some sense. Let's talk about Jordan Staal quickly for the Carolina Hurricanes. Another guy that's really high in Corsi at just 4,600. Definitely think he makes some sense, but I have some concerns with this Carolina and Boston game. I definitely think it's going to be one of the slower pace games of the night. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to props, but I think Staal at 4,600 still makes some sense as a potential one-off play. So I think I'm kind of on that a little bit, but I think a lot of the value that we're going to want to attack at the center position is for the San Jose Sharks. So Sean and I talked about it a little bit on the full show today, but kind of attacking some of these guys like Logan Couture at 6,700. Definitely like that. Joe Pavelski is playing the wing, but he does have center eligibility on DraftKings. So Pavelski is the guy I'm kind of dialed into. He's a high volume shooter, 88th percentile on shots over the past month. He's just one of those guys. He's probably underpriced at 5,500 in this matchup. His Corsi is right up there as well in the 94th percentile. So really like Pavelski as kind of a mid-range option today. 5,500 certainly seems like he's too cheap for this matchup against the Rangers. We know the Rangers have allowed some of the most shots in the entire league. And on the other side of things, the San Jose system just revolves around taking a ton of shots. So the Rangers have allowed the 4th most shots per game this year. So definitely think it's a really good spot for them. And speaking of good spots, the Phoenix Coyotes, we talked about this a bit as well, but against this Ottawa team that has allowed the 2nd most shots this year, definitely think that they're back in play. Their price is still reasonable. A guy like Derek Stepan at the center position at 5K certainly makes some sense. So I'll be looking at that a little bit more in a bit, but that's kind of where I'm at on the center position. If we look over at the winger position, there's a lot more to pay up for. So if we just start at the top, he is one of our highest shot predictions of the entire slate. He normally does. Jonathan Marchessault at 7,300. So if you're trying to decide between Marchessault and Crosby at the high end. Definitely think Marchessault is going to carry some lower ownership in tournaments. Has a ton of upside. This matchup isn't great against Nashville. This is another one of those games where normally we'd be targeting some of these players, but the pace doesn't set up very well. But Marchessault's a guy that can battle through any type of matchup for sure. 99th percentile in shots, 99th in power play shots as well. So I think he's kind of the pay up to be contrarian move at the winger position. As far as other guys go in this range, I really like some of the guys that I'm seeing for Columbus. So I think Columbus is in a really good spot against this Detroit team that has really struggled. Cam Atkinson at 6,900, kind of in a similar price range, but I think he has a really strong floor today relative to this matchup. 98th percentile in shots, 99th in power play shots. But again, shots plus blocks is something that's kind of interesting too. You get a little bit of blocks with Cam Atkinson, 99th percentile there. So ton of upside with that. Really like this entire first line for Columbus. Boone Jenner, another value play that I'm sure we'll touch on in a bit when we get to that. But as far as the power play units, Anthony Duclair at 4,200. A lot of these guys make a lot of sense. Boone Jenner, Panarin, like these guys on this first power play unit. It's a really good spot against the Detroit team that has been really not so good this year on the penalty kill. They've also been taking a decent amount of taking a decent amount of penalties, fourth most in the league, time shorthanded. So it's a really good spot for Columbus from a Corsi perspective, from a special teams perspective, and from a price perspective. So really like these guys today. That's pretty much all I had at the winger position. I'm pretty narrow at that position today. One more guy that I'll mention that I do really like. Sean and I spent a decent amount of time talking about him today on the full show is Evander Kane. So if you're fading some of this top power play unit, Evander Kane at 6,300. His price isn't down there because of his peripheral stats, guys. He's still one of those guys that 97th percentile in shots, 99th in shots plus blocks over the past month, but he hasn't been scoring. That's why his price is low. I definitely want to be early on a guy like Kane. We talked about being early on a guy like Sidney Crosby. It's a somewhat similar situation because his price is too low relative to where his shots are. And a guy like him, he's always going to kind of make it back, I think, to one of those guys that we're targeting for goals as well. So I think he makes a lot of sense. Let's move over to the defense position. So per usual, we're making our decision between Brent Burns and Erik Karlsson. The difference is that the price difference is just massive now. So today, I'm really interested in Erik Karlsson. We did see him finally start to get some shots lately after going shotless in 2 straight games, 7 shots on goal in the last game. His time on ice is still really solid. And as you can see, Karlsson and Burns are back on that top power play unit together. So I think that he's a really good way to get access to this Sharks power play today. So definitely on Erik Karlsson, especially at that price. If we're just looking at kind of the shots plus blocks for today, Seth Jones, he hasn't been back for too many games now, but I mentioned this Columbus team. Makes a ton of sense to go to a guy like Jones at 6,300. He is in the 99th percentile on shots plus blocks. Smaller sample there, but still a guy over the long term has given us a ton of value in that regard. So even speaking to some of the longer term stuff, like Shane Gothisvær a ton today, 5,800. He's one of those guys that really hasn't been quite priced up yet for the same reason kind of as Evander Kane. He just has really struggled to kind of get on the score sheet this year, but the peripheral stats are there. He's going to block shots at an elite rate, 99th percentile on power play shots, so at least his usage is coming at the man advantage. Definitely like that. Anaheim is a fantastic matchup for shots as well, so really like the idea of going to Ghost today, especially if some of these guys are over owned kind of in the same range. Like that a lot. Keep an eye on Chris Letang. There's going to be probably some news before lock related to him, but at 6,800, getting access to the Pittsburgh power play makes a good amount of sense. One last guy that I'll mention, Sami Vatanen. So he's not really one of those guys that I'm targeting for a ton of upside, but at 5,500, he does have a really nice floor, 99th percentile in shots plus blocks. I think you can kind of attack him as like a one-off play. As you can see, just he's got some 6-5 blocked shot games. Really nice floor for a guy that you'll get at lower ownership if you're really trying to differentiate on your one-off plays in your stacks. So someone else that I probably should mention, Dougie Hamilton, this Carolina team. I mentioned I don't love this game, but he's one of the ones that's been priced up quite a bit, right? So Dougie Hamilton at 5,400 is a little bit different than when we were targeting him earlier in the season. But again, 99th percentile in shots. So I really like the idea of going to him in tournaments. Same thing with Mark Giordano. $6,200 for him, a guy that's been priced up a lot, but probably is worth it. These defensemen they block shots and shoot at such an elite rate. I definitely think that there's a lot of different directions you can go, but it's a great place to spend up and spend your salary. So that's pretty much all I have for kind of the extra stuff today, guys. Let's jump over to props. All right, check out this full article over at the Action Network. And Henrik Lundqvist today is the guy that I want to tell you guys about. Definitely have more props in the main article, but Henrik, we talked a ton about San Jose today just because of the spot they're in for shots. I like going long on Lundqvist today for a lot of the same reasons. I think that he stands out as a pretty easy over situation. Our save metric at Lab says Lundqvist projected for easily the highest saves of the entire night. New York has been pretty attackable, guys. Fourth most shots on goal per game. A lot of the same intrigue has to do with the Shark system, which we'll continue to talk about. They're just trying to get as many pucks to the net as possible. 37.7 shots per game. Only Carolina has averaged more shots per game this season than the Sharks. So pretty aggressive line for Hank. You'll have to check out the article for the exact line that I'm attacking tonight, but still think that the over is a pretty decent situation for him. All right, that's it for today, guys. If you like my work and you want to support my work, be sure and check out Fantasy Labs and the Action Network. If you want to take that a step further, be sure and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Give me a follow over on Twitch as well if you want to check out some of my live streams throughout the week for both NHL and NFL. I'll be tweeting out those links on my Twitter account as well. I'm at Joe Holka there. Pretty good slate, guys. 11 games. Definitely let me know in the comments what you think. I think it shapes up really well for tournaments, and I'll talk to you guys soon. All right, good talk. See you guys out there.